Omaha Beach, Normandy, June 6, 1944. Private First Class Eddie Malone is lying in blood-red surf, holding a helmet on a stick, when his squad leader tells him he's wasting time they don't have. 24 years old, Brooklyn longshoreman, zero tactical training beyond basic. The Germans have a machine gun nest dug into the bluffs above Dog Green sector, and in the past 17 minutes that nest has cut down 42 men from the 116th Infantry Regiment. Malone's platoon sergeant called his helmet-on-a-stick idea goddamn theater. The other squad leaders called it desperation masquerading as tactics. When he'd first suggested using decoys to draw fire during the pre-invasion briefing on the transport ship, the company commander wanted to know if Malone had been reading too many dime store novels. Malone explained it was for locating hidden positions. They told him to focus on getting off the beach alive and let trained reconnaissance handle fire identification. He made the decoy anyway. The helmet, a standard M1 steel pot with liner removed, is mounted on a length of driftwood Malone grabbed from the obstacles at the waterline. Painted to look occupied from a distance, weighted at the base so it won't blow over. The whole contraption looks like something a kid would build playing war in his backyard, which is exactly what it is. Staff Sergeant Frank Kowalski crouches behind a destroyed Higgins boat, watching Malone work, and his voice cuts through the chaos of naval gunfire and German artillery. "Put that toy down and move. We need every rifle pushing toward the seawall." Malone doesn't respond. His hands, numbed from 2 hours in cold water, are adjusting the helmet's angle, positioning it to catch light, making it visible from the bluffs 200 yards up the beach. "Malone, that's a direct order." "Respectfully, Sergeant, I can't shoot what I can't see. And right now, I can't see where that MG is firing from. Neither can anyone else. That's why we're suppressing the entire hillside, which wastes ammunition and doesn't stop the killing. I need 30 seconds. You don't have 30 seconds. We're getting carved apart while you play with..." A burst of machine gun fire stitches across the sand 10 feet from their position. Men scream. Someone calls for a medic. The German MZ-42, firing at 1,200 rounds per minute, sounds like a boss saw tearing through sheet metal. Kowalski presses himself lower behind cover. "Where the hell is that coming from?" "That's what I'm trying to find out, Sergeant." If you want to see how a Brooklyn longshoreman's homemade decoy exposed a hidden machine gun nest and changed fire and maneuver tactics on D-Day, hit that like button. It helps us share forgotten stories like this. And subscribe if you haven't already. Back to Malone. The problem with machine gun nests on Omaha Beach wasn't just that they were deadly, it was that they were invisible. The Germans had spent 2 years fortifying the Normandy coast. They'd studied every approach, calculated every angle, prepared every field of fire. Their defensive positions weren't obvious concrete bunkers. Those drew naval bombardment. The truly lethal positions were camouflaged. Thuggin hillsides covered with netting and vegetation, firing through narrow slits that were nearly impossible to spot from the beach. A machine gunner in one of these positions could sweep an entire sector, killing dozens of men, and remain completely hidden. American forces couldn't suppress what they couldn't locate. They'd fire at the general area, hoping to get lucky, but accuracy without identification meant burning through ammunition while the killing continued. Standard doctrine said to use reconnaissance teams to spot positions, then call in artillery or air support. But reconnaissance teams needed time, and on Omaha Beach, at 0730 hours on June 6th, time was measured in seconds between heartbeats and casualties. Company A, 116th Infantry, had landed at 0630. By 0700, half the company was dead or wounded. The survivors were pinned down in a 200-yard stretch of beach between the waterline and a seawall they couldn't reach. Every time someone tried to advance, German machine guns opened up. But nobody could identify the firing positions well enough to return effective fire. Eddie Malone had been thinking about this problem since the briefing 3 days earlier. He'd grown up on the Brooklyn docks, where survival sometimes meant figuring out which warehouse boss was going to cause trouble before he started causing it. You learned to read situations, to spot threats before they materialized, to use misdirection when you couldn't use force. On the beach, under fire, watching men die because nobody knew where the killing was coming from, Malone decided to apply doc logic to combat. If you can't see the threat, make the threat reveal itself. The helmet decoy was embarrassingly simple in concept. A steel pot mounted on a stick, positioned to look like a soldier's head. Move it into the enemy's field of vision, and if there's a shooter watching, they'll fire at it. The muzzle flash or the impact trajectory will reveal the position. Hunters used similar tactics for locating game. Soldiers had used decoys in various forms since ancient warfare. But in 1944, American infantry doctrine didn't include improvised decoy tactics in the field manual. It certainly didn't include a private first class with zero tactical training building one from beach trash while under fire. Malone had assembled his first prototype on the transport ship. He'd taken his spare helmet, removed the liner to reduce weight, and mounted it on a wooden pole he'd borrowed from ship stores. He'd painted a rough camouflage pattern and added dirt for texture. From 20 yards, it looked occupied. His squad mates thought it was a joke, something to pass time during the crossing. Sergeant Kowalski told him to leave it on the ship. It wasn't regulation equipment. Malone carried it anyway. Strapped to his pack, when the Higgins boat hit the beach and the ramp dropped and machine gun fire tore through the men in front of him, when Malone dove into the surf and crawled through bodies and wreckage to reach cover, he brought the decoy with him. Now, crouched behind destroyed landing craft, with 42 men dead and a German MG nest somewhere in the bluffs systematically annihilating anyone who moved, Malone had 30 seconds to prove his dock worker improvisation could work in combat. He positioned the decoy 20 feet to his right, wedged between two tank obstacles. The helmet sat at roughly head height for a crouching soldier. Malone had angled it slightly upward toward the bluffs, making it visible from elevated positions. "What's the plan?" Kowalski shouted. "You wave that thing around and hope they waste bullets?" "I raise it slowly, like a soldier checking the approach. Natural movement. If there's a gunner watching this sector, he'll fire. When he fires, I watch for muzzle flash. Then we know where he is. And if you're wrong, if he doesn't fire, then we're no worse off than we are now. And if he does fire and you can't spot the position, then at least we know he's watching this sector and we adjust accordingly." Kowalski stared at him. "You've thought this through." "I've had 2 hours to think, Sergeant. Not much else to do while lying in the surf." Kowalski nodded slowly. "All right, do it. But if this gets anyone killed—" "It already is, Sergeant. That's why I'm doing it." Malone gripped the base of the stick. His hands were shaking, from cold, from adrenaline, from fear he wouldn't admit to. He took 3 deep breaths, controlled his heart rate the way his father had taught him before union negotiations on the docks. Calm mind, steady hands, clear eyes. He raised the decoy slowly. 6 inches, 12 inches, 2 feet. Nothing. 3 feet. The helmet was now visible above the tank obstacle, silhouetted against the gray morning sky. Still nothing. Malone moved it slightly left, then right, simulating a soldier checking angles. Natural reconnaissance movement. The German gunner fired. The burst lasted less than a second. 8 rounds, maybe 10. The impacts struck sand 15 feet from the decoy. The gunner was shooting from an angle, leading the target. But in that half-second muzzle flash, Malone saw it. A narrow slit in the hillside, 220 yards up the beach, 40 feet above sea level, camouflaged behind scrub vegetation and netting. The flash was brief, barely visible in daylight, but Malone's eyes had been focused on exactly the right spot. He dropped the decoy and rolled behind cover. "Did you see it?" Kowalski demanded. 220 yards, 40 feet elevation, 11 o'clock from our position.
Narrow slit firing, probably concrete reinforced, covered with camo netting. MG-42, firing in short bursts to conserve ammunition. Kowalski looked at him with something approaching respect. "You're sure?" "I saw the muzzle flash, Sergeant. I know where it is." "Can you hit it from here?" Malone checked his M1 Garand. "Not with this. Effective range is 500 yards, but accuracy at that angle through a narrow slit, I'd need a sniper rifle in perfect conditions. But I know someone who can." Corporal Jimmy Hastings was 30 yards down the beach, pinned behind a destroyed Sherman tank with 3 other riflemen. Before the war, Hastings had been a competitive shooter, Pennsylvania state champion at 200 yards. His eyes were sharp, his hands were steady, and he carried an M1903 Springfield with an Underdal scope that he'd somehow convinced his CO to let him bring. Malone crawled to Hastings' position. Took him 2 minutes, moving between bodies and wreckage, staying low, timing his movement between German firebursts. "Hastings, I've got a target." The corporal looked up, his face streaked with sand and blood, not his own. "What kind of target?" "MG nest, 220 yards, 40 feet up, 11 o'clock from our position. Narrow slit. I can mark it with the decoy if you need a reference." "You located it? How?" "Drew fire." "Long story. Can you hit it?" Hastings checked his rifle. "Maybe, if I can see the slit, if the angle's right, if I get lucky. That's all I'm asking for." Hastings glanced at his squad mates. "Cover me. I need 30 seconds to acquire and engage." The other riflemen nodded. They'd been watching Malone's crawl and understood something was happening, something that might change the math on this beach. Malone returned to his position. He raised the decoy again, same slow, natural movement, same simulated reconnaissance pattern. The German gunner fired again, same short burst, same trajectory. Hastings had his scope on the hillside. He saw the muzzle flash, saw the slit. Calculated wind, angle, distance. He fired once. The Springfield's crack was sharp, distinctive, cutting through the machine gun chatter and artillery rumble. 220 yards away, 40 feet up, the German gunner jerked backward. The MG-42 went silent. The silence lasted 3 seconds. Then someone down the beach shouted, "The nest is down! The nest is down!" Men started moving, not running, crawling, advancing by inches, using the sudden absence of that particular machine gun to gain ground toward the seawall. Kowalski crawled to Malone's position. It worked. Jesus Christ, it actually worked. "1 nest down," Malone said quietly. "How many more?" Intelligence counted 7 MG positions covering Dog Green sector. "Then I need 6 more decoys."
Kowalski stared at him. "You're serious?" "Sergeant, we've got maybe 2,000 men on this beach. Half are dead or wounded. The survivors are pinned down by machine guns they can't see and can't suppress. Every minute we stay here, more men die. But if we can locate the nests, if we can identify firing positions, we can eliminate them. Sniper fire, artillery, whatever we've got. But first, we need to know where they are." "And your helmet trick can do that?" "It just did." Kowalski made his decision. "All right, find Hastings, tell him you're working together. Locate every MG nest in this sector. I'll get you more decoys. There's enough wrecked gear on this beach to build a dozen. Move fast. We don't have time to waste." We're able to research and share these stories because of viewers like you. If you want to support independent history content, consider joining our Patreon, link in the description. Now back to Malone's decoy operation. Over the next 40 minutes, Eddie Malone and Jimmy Hastings worked their way across Dog Green sector, systematically locating and eliminating German machine gun nests using the helmet decoy method. The process was simple but required precision. Malone positioned a decoy in the suspected field of fire for a German position. He raised it slowly, simulating natural soldier movement. If a gunner was watching, they fired. Malone marked the muzzle flash location. Hastings engaged with his scoped Springfield. They moved to the next position. By 08:15, they'd located 5 nests. Hastings had eliminated 3 with direct hits. The other two had been marked for artillery fire. Naval destroyers offshore were now able to target specific coordinates instead of blindly bombarding the hillside. Word spread fast in combat. By 0830, 3 other teams were using improvised decoys, helmets, packs, anything that could simulate a soldier's silhouette from a distance. The beach was still a killing ground, but the invisible threat was becoming visible. The Germans were losing their primary advantage: concealment. At 0847, Malone's decoy technique revealed something unexpected. He was working the eastern edge of Dog Green when he raised a helmet and got no response. He tried again. Nothing. Moved the decoy 40 yards left. Still nothing. "This sector's clear," he called to Hastings. "No fire."
"Or they're being smart," Hastings replied, "not falling for the trick." "Maybe. Or," Malone studied the hillside, "or they've pulled back, withdrawn to secondary positions." He was right. Intelligence would later confirm that by 0900, German commanders had ordered a tactical withdrawal from forward positions that had been compromised by decoy identification. The Americans had turned a defensive advantage into a liability. German gunners who revealed their positions were being eliminated, so the smart move was to relocate, which meant the Americans were no longer pinned down. They could advance. By 1000 hours, American forces had reached the seawall across most of Dog Green sector. By 1100, they were pushing up the bluffs. By 1300, they had penetrated German defenses and were moving inland. The breakthrough wasn't solely due to Malone's decoy tactics. Naval gunfire, armor support, air cover, and sheer infantry determination all played roles. But the helmet decoy technique had solved a critical problem: identifying hidden positions so they could be eliminated or suppressed. Captain John Harrington, commanding officer of Company A, 116th Infantry, personally found Malone at 1430 hours. The captain was exhausted, blooded, but alive, one of 73 survivors from a company that had landed with 200 men. "Private Malone, your sergeant says you're the one who figured out the decoy system." "Yes, sir." Seemed like the logical approach. "Logical," Harrington almost laughed. "Son, do you know how many tactical training sessions I've attended? How many manuals I've read? How many officers told me the only way to neutralize hidden positions was through suppressive fire or direct assault?" "I wouldn't know, sir. I'm just a longshoreman from Brooklyn." "And that's exactly why it worked. You didn't know it was supposed to be impossible, so you tried it anyway." Harrington paused. "I'm recommending you for a Bronze Star, and I'm sending a full report to Division. Your decoy technique needs to be in the field manual." "Respectfully, sir, it's just a helmet on a stick. Anyone could have thought of it." "But they didn't. You did. Under fire, while men were dying. That's what matters." The helmet decoy technique was officially adopted by U.S. Army infantry units in July 1944. A classified training bulletin, later declassified in 1977, described the method in detail. Improvised decoy tactics for position identification. When facing concealed enemy positions, soldiers may construct decoys using helmets, packs, or other equipment to simulate human targets. Decoys should be raised slowly in suspected fields of fire. Enemy gunners will often engage, revealing their position through muzzle flash or tracers. Once identified, positions can be engaged by designated marksmen or called in for artillery support.
The bulletin included diagrams showing proper decoy construction, positioning techniques, and coordination with sniper elements. It credited combat-tested methods developed during Normandy operations, but didn't name Malone specifically. The military preferred doctrine to appear institutional rather than individual. By August 1944, decoy tactics were being used across the European theater, from hedgerow fighting in Normandy to urban combat in French towns. American soldiers used improvised decoys to locate German snipers, machine gun nests, and anti-tank positions. The Germans adapted. They stopped firing at obvious decoys, trained gunners to recognize fake targets, adjusted tactics to avoid revealing positions. But by then, the Americans had gained ground, pushed inland, and broken through the Atlantic Wall defenses. The window of opportunity that Malone's decoy had opened on Omaha Beach was brief, but brief was enough. Eddie Malone survived D-Day. He survived the push across France. He survived the Battle of the Bulge in December 1944, where he used decoy tactics to locate German positions in the Ardennes forests. He was wounded twice, once by shrapnel near Saint-Lô in July, once by small arms fire outside Bastogne in December. Neither wound was serious enough for evacuation. He stayed with his unit. By war's end, Malone was a staff sergeant, Bronze Star, Purple Heart with Oak Leaf Cluster, Combat Infantryman Badge. He'd trained 53 soldiers in decoy tactics. He'd personally used decoys to identify 32 enemy positions. He'd become something the Army didn't have a designation for, a tactical improvisation specialist. In March 1945, a young lieutenant, fresh from officer training, asked Malone how he'd come up with the helmet decoy idea. Malone thought about it. "Grew up on the docks, sir. When someone wants to start trouble, you learn to make them show their hand before they throw the first punch. Same principle here. Germans wanted to kill us without us seeing them, so we made them show us where they were. That simple?" "Combat's never simple, sir, but sometimes the solutions are. You just have to be willing to try something that's not in the manual. And if it doesn't work, then you try something else. Dying while following doctrine doesn't make you less dead. Might as well die trying new things." The lieutenant wrote that down in his notebook. Malone returned to Brooklyn in October 1945. He went back to the docks, back to loading ships and negotiating with union bosses and living a life where the biggest threat was maybe a workplace accident or a bad contract. He married his girl Teresa, whom he'd been writing to throughout the war. They had 3 kids. He never talked about Normandy with them, never mentioned the helmet decoy, never explained that their father had changed infantry tactics by building toys out of beach trash. In 1964, a military historian researching D-Day operations found Malone's name in declassified after-action reports. The historian called Malone's house, asked if he'd be willing to discuss his experiences. Malone declined. "Nothing to discuss. I did what needed doing. So did everyone else. That's all there is to it." "But your decoy technique wasn't mine. Any soldier could have thought of it. I just happened to be the one who tried it first. Wrong place, right time. Got lucky. That's war." Saving lives through tactical innovation isn't luck, Mr. Malone.
No, sir, it's not. But I didn't save lives. I identified targets so other men could kill Germans, so more Americans could survive to kill more Germans, so maybe eventually we'd win and go home. That's not innovation. That's just murder with extra steps. I'm glad we won. I'm glad I came home. But I'm not going to pretend what I did was anything more than finding slightly smarter ways to kill people. The historian thanked him and hung up. The interview never happened. Eddie Malone died in 1998, age 78. Heart attack, quick and painless. His obituary in the Brooklyn Daily mentioned his military service in passing. U.S. Army World War II veteran, saw combat in Europe. It didn't mention Omaha Beach, didn't mention the decoy, didn't mention that his improvised tactic had been adopted into official doctrine and used thousands of times across multiple theaters of war. What the obituary did mention was his work with the Longshoremen's Union, his advocacy for workplace safety regulations, his 40-year marriage to Teresa, his 3 children and 7 grandchildren, and the fact that he'd been a devoted Dodgers fan who never forgave the team for moving to Los Angeles. At his funeral, one of his grandchildren found a wooden box in his belongings. Inside was a rusted M1 helmet, dented and corroded, with a hole through the top where a German bullet had struck. Attached was a note in Malone's handwriting. Omaha Beach, June 6, 1944. The decoy that worked. Keep it so someone remembers that sometimes the simplest ideas are the ones that save lives. The helmet was donated to the National D-Day Museum in New Orleans in 1999. It sits in a display case with a placard explaining its history. M1 helmet used as improvised decoy by PFC Eddie Malone, 116th Infantry Regiment, to identify German machine gun positions on Omaha Beach D-Day. Malone's decoy technique was adopted into U.S. Army doctrine and used throughout the European campaign. This helmet was struck by enemy fire while being used to draw German fire, revealing a concealed MG nest that was subsequently eliminated. Most visitors walk past without stopping. It looks like any other dented helmet, just another piece of war surplus. But it's not. It's proof that warfare isn't always won by the soldiers with the best training or the most powerful weapons. Sometimes it's won by a Brooklyn longshoreman with no tactical training who looked at a problem, thought about how dock workers handle threats, and built a toy out of beach trash that changed how armies fight. The improvised decoy technique influenced military doctrine for decades.
Vietnam. American soldiers used decoy tactics to locate Viet Cong snipers in jungle terrain. Helmets on sticks, packs positioned to simulate soldiers, even inflatable dummies in some cases. Iraq and Afghanistan. Modern forces used similar principles with technological enhancements: thermal decoys to attract heat-seeking weapons, remote-controlled robots to draw fire, drones to simulate movement patterns. The core concept remained: make the enemy reveal their position by giving them a target that's not actually a soldier. In 2014, on the 70th anniversary of D-Day, a delegation of Army historians visited the National D-Day Museum. They stood in front of Malone's helmet display for a long time. One of them, a colonel who'd served 3 tours in Afghanistan, said quietly, "We used this exact principle in Helmand Province. Drones posing as supply helicopters to draw Taliban fire. Same concept, different technology. Worked like a charm." "Did you know it came from Omaha Beach?" asked the curator. "I knew it was old doctrine. Didn't know it was this old. Didn't know it started with one guy and a helmet. One guy who didn't know he wasn't supposed to try it." The colonel nodded. That's usually how the best tactics get invented. Someone who doesn't know the rules just does what makes sense. They stood silently for another minute, looking at the rusted helmet with its bullet hole, thinking about all the lives saved by a Brooklyn longshoreman who'd never learned that his idea was supposed to be impossible.
If this story moved you the way it moved us, do me a favor. Hit that like button. Every like tells YouTube to show this story to more people. Hit subscribe and turn on notifications. We're rescuing forgotten stories from dusty archives every single day. Stories about soldiers who changed warfare through ingenuity and courage. Real people, real heroism. Drop a comment right now and tell us where you're watching from. United States? United Kingdom? France? Germany? Our community stretches across the entire world. You're not just a viewer. You're part of keeping these memories alive. Tell us your location. Tell us if someone in your family served. Just let us know you're here. Thank you for watching. Thank you for making sure Eddie Malone doesn't disappear into silence. These men deserve to be remembered, and you're helping make that happen.